I witnessed my son do something terrible on Halloween by Girl from the Crypt. I have a confession to make. I've been trying so hard to forget what I saw, but now that Halloween is around the corner again, all these memories resurfaced all of a sudden. I know that it's wrong to keep my mouth shut, but before I tell my husband about it, and then later on the authorities, I want to get this off my chest anonymously. I don't know. Maybe this will help me confess to my loved ones. My son, I'll call him Al for the sake of the story, is crazy about Halloween. Each year he dresses up like a zombie. Al loves zombies. Last year he begged and pleaded with me to let him go trick-or-treating with his friends. I used to always come along, but that year, he wanted to go without adult supervision. Just him and his little buddies. He was about 10 years old at the time and pretty mature already. I was reluctant at first, but after thinking it over for a while, I finally approved. We live in a friendly rural neighborhood bordering on large cornfields. Everyone knows everyone else, so I figured they would be fine. The kid did need his freedom after all. Plus, his friend Amy would come along as well. She was about 12 years old already, and she always had to remind the younger friends to behave. However, one last glimpse of uncertainty within me caused me to decide to sneakily follow, just to keep an eye on Al from a distance without bothering him, just to be absolutely safe. I did as planned on Hallows Eve. I let my son put on his costume and I painted him up in some spooky zombie makeup, complete with sprinkles of fake blood and ripping his clothing, and a little bit of it around his mouth. He took a look in the mirror and let out a squeal of delight. He hugged me, grabbed his little bag, and rushed outside. I waited just a little bit before going out myself. His father wouldn't be home that night, so I left a bowl of candy on the front porch, in the hopes that it wasn't raided immediately. Upon walking out the door, I saw Al run towards the group of kids in fancy costumes. I recognized all of them. There was Amy in her witch costume. Our neighbor's son Mark was a vampire. There was a ghost whom I could only assume was Al's best friend, Blake. I smiled at the sweet sight. It was always just the four of them. I followed them at a pretty safe distance, trying not to catch their attention. I watched as they rang the doorbells of several houses on their harvest, growing more and more cheerful with the more candy that they received. It was obvious that Amy wasn't too fond of Al's costume, though. From time to time, my son would scare her by jumping out in front of her all of a sudden, or making creepy sounds. Amy would shriek pretty loudly, and every single time, they would all bust out laughing. At some point along the way, they begun developing Al's jump scares into a full-on game of catch, my son merrily chasing around the others who were happily giggling, trying to avoid him. It was adorable to watch him play. I knew they weren't little anymore, but, it still warmed my heart. They had reached the end of the main road and they were still playing catch. They were enjoying themselves and I was content. Right up until Amy suddenly ran off into the cornfield on the side of the road. Al, Mark, and Blake followed her, howling like little monsters all along the way. I was taken aback. The cornfields were large and children, or rather residents of our neighborhood in general, were forbidden from entering it. Not because they would trample down corn, but because people had gotten lost in there before. I couldn't help but get instantly worried. I hurried and ran after them, but seeing as I was in pretty bad shape, it took me a little while to find them. When I finally did catch up with them, I found that they had gathered on the side of the field. Amy was still chuckling, but she was completely out of breath. "Guys, give me a second," she panted. Come on," Blake argued from underneath his white cloak. "Playing zombies is so much fun," Al cheered. In the heat of the game, he had completely given up on his usual calm demeanor, and he was losing himself in a fit of giggles. "Can we keep playing zombies, please?" "Yeah, just give me a second, guys," Amy repeated, still bent over trying to catch her breath. Suddenly, all three boys stuck their head together and began murmuring something amongst themselves, just out of earshot of Amy. What are you talking about?" the young girl asked. We're playing zombies for real this time, my son said. I frowned in confusion but stayed where I was. I watched as Blake and Mark strode towards Amy. They grabbed her by the arm. It's okay, they're just trying to scare her again, I told myself. But that notion quickly got knocked out of me when Al suddenly picked up a large rock from the dusty ground. His skinny arms were struggling to lift the heavy fucking thing. Slowly, in a pace that was almost menacing, he made his way over to Amy. I wanted to intervene. I wanted to dash out from my hiding spot and stop him, tear that rock out of his hands. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Tears began welling up in my eyes and running down my cheeks, as my mouth just dropped open trying to form sounds. To somehow produce this shriek, and I was hoping to prevail. I tried to move. I tried so hard. But my body just didn't obey me. I watched in horror as my son lifted the rock above his head and brought it down on the screaming, struggling girl's head. He did it again. Then again. Then again. My son, my child, my flesh and blood, bashed his friend's skull in. Blood was gushing everywhere, onto my son's hands, his face, his costume. Al let go of the stone and knelt down and fumbled around in the remains of Amy's head. I felt the vomit rise in my throat when I realized exactly what he was doing. I remained paralyzed with fear, terror, and, well, disgust, as my son carefully picked at the bloodied, gory mess and slowly led bits of Amy's brain to his mouth. One by one, they vanished in between his lips, like trick-or-treat candy. I didn't stay to watch Mark and Blake join him. When I finally regained control of my body, I simply turned and ran. I ran all the way back home, tears of shock just gushing out of my eyes. I barely made it into the bathroom before I started vomiting. When Al came home later that evening, I didn't come out to greet him. I couldn't. I wouldn't dare look in his eyes. I wouldn't have been able to. I haven't been able to look at him in the same way ever since. I don't know why he did such a thing. Was it my fault? Where did I go wrong? How did my sweet little boy turn into a monster? I've pretended that everything was fine for almost an entire year now. Every time I would run into Mark or Blake's parents around town, every time I would pick my son up from school, I pretended I never saw what I did see. They found Amy's corpse the day after Halloween. The police never found out who'd done it. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be writing this now. No suspects were arrested either. When they questioned my son, he lied through his teeth. Amy's parents moved away not long after. They couldn't stand being in that home where they had so many memories with their daughter. I know I should have told the police, and I hate myself for being too weak to do the right thing. I was scared of my own son, but at the same time scared of losing him too. I hate myself for not helping Amy. I don't know why I was unable to move, but if I had been able to, could I have traded his life for hers? She would be standing here right now. I wish Halloween 2018 never happened. It left my son a killer and a sweet young girl dead. And me, a guilt-stricken shell of my former self. Now, I'm not stupid. I know withholding information from the police in a case of a child murder has severe legal consequences. I deserve everything that's coming to me. But so does he. I guess I thought telling the truth wouldn't make a difference. It wouldn't bring Amy back to life. But by now, I know that that was just cowardly, foolish thoughts of a cowardly, foolish person. I know it's way too late. But for once, I'm gonna do the right thing. I'm gonna use the bloodstained costume as evidence. I never disposed of it. They're gonna be able to figure out which stains are Amy's and which are fake blood, though. I'm gonna name Mark and Blake too. No more Halloween. No more playing zombie. I know you guys have a little bit of a predisposition to the longer stories, but I needed to just sit down and do something relatively short so I could drop the big wet fucking turd in your sub box the next time I upload. Because boy, is it a long one. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it. Let's give a quick shout out to the patrons. Dan R, Paul Z, Cody V, KSX, Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, JY Pyromancer, Hayden MH, Ethan A, Dark Side of the Bear, Daniel H, and Maximilian Charles P. Guys, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And feel free to become a patron down below. Thank you.